So as Sam says, this is a massive experiment. So every year we get the feedback that the peak end rule is an amazing principle that we should be using within Nudgestock. So we thought we've had a lot of conversations today, a lot of insights coming from the stage, and now it's time to turn the tables onto you for you to become the final speaker. But before that, if anybody has listened to the O Behave podcast, this room is now becoming the live recording of the June edition of the O Behave podcast. And so knowing that we're going live to thousands of people on Monday morning, going into their ears as they're commuting, we're going to make sure there's lots of energy in the room to make sure that when people put those headphones in their ears, they're having a good Monday morning. So are we good with that?
Yeah. Are we good with that?
Yeah. So we're going to play a quick game, and it's called the 5 levels of hype. So I need you to play with me, and essentially we're going to start with a number 1, then we'll go to number 2, then a 3, and then we'll find out what 4 and 5 is. So let's practice number 1. It's a small, very quiet hand clap. Number 2 is a normal clap. Number 3 is a really loud clap. Number 4 is an even one. Number 5 is a mouse. 3, 5, 1, 5, 0.
Okay, thank you, Dan. How do you follow that? So, in a couple of moments, we are going to press the record button. First of all, any O Behave listeners in the crowd? A few, yeah, about 80%, I thought there. If only there was a way we could get up the Spotify rankings. So, while we are here, the next thing we need to do is press record. When I count down from 3 to 1, at 3, I want you to do your batshit level crazy number 5. Are we ready? Yes. Are we ready? Yes. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Woo! Hello, Nudges. Welcome to episode 24 of the O Behave podcast, live from Nudgestock 2019 with your host Dan Bennett and me, Mike Hughes. And today we have a very, very special guest. The Nudgestock 2019 audience!
Now, here at the Behavioural Science Practice, we know that by asking provocative questions, we can get to new and provocative answers. So what could possibly go wrong by asking our 6,000 people here tonight? Asking our 6,000 audience today to say provocative questions and ideas to a big conversation panel to see if we can tackle one of the biggest challenges of our time. And as you know, that the one that we would most agree, I'm sure from this morning, is climate change. So throughout the day, we've been collecting in your provocative thoughts, and we're now going to hand over the microphone to you to test those of the panel. Before we get going, we have our method, we have our challenge, so please put your hands together and keep it going for our big conversation panel of Rory Sutherland, Milena B, and author David Bodanis. Cheers. Okay, so we have 15 minutes. We have a lot of suggestions to get through, so I would suggest a quickfire round, quickfire conversation from the panel. We'll discuss the merits and some of the defects of some of the ideas that come out, and at the end we will pick the idea that we believe is the most provocative and the question that gets us to the most interesting new space. Are we ready, panel? That sounds like a good yes.
Yes.
So, Mike, you're in the audience now. Can we have provocative question number 1?
Hello, does this work? Is this on? Hello. So, I'm in the audience. I'm with the proles here, but I'm just going to walk through. So, hello. Table number 6. Paul, can you please read out your provocative thought for us, please?
Okay, so we're from Sheffield, and in the early kind of 1900s, height of the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of people dying just from the poor air quality. And the thing with that is you could see it, you could literally see it, the smog in the air. The problem with CO2 is that you can't, so we want to colour the carbon.
So how do we make the bad things, which are called climate change, more salient?
I mean, one really interesting thing is, A, it's patently invisible. I'm not sure if there's a chemist here who could actually make it change colour, which would be interesting in itself. What's also interesting, I think, is that the metrics we use are completely mentally useless. Like tons of CO2. It's very weird to talk about weight of a gas, isn't it? I mean, it's not very kind of System 1 friendly. So if someone can think of, it makes a big difference, by the way, the metrics you use. We make a mistake, I think, in the Anglo-Saxon world in using miles per gallon rather than essentially gallons per 100 kilometres or litres per 100 kilometres, because it totally misrepresents. Going from a 15 to a 12 mile per gallon car sounds relatively trivial, whereas actually in percentage terms, that's much more important than going from 40 to 50 miles per gallon. So it misrepresents things. If someone can come up with a really, really good measure, which isn't tons, essentially, which isn't even cubic meters, if someone can find a really, really clever measure of that, they've made huge progress just in that alone. That's me.
Yeah, I think I would like to add a little bit more to that. The problem with climate change is that on the individual level, you don't know what these metrics mean. So one of the cool things is, well, how can we make that more digestible for that particular individual to understand, well, you know, how much, you know, CO2 am I emitting? What's the impact on me? And make it salient that way.
David.
As somebody who believes, I think I'm the last person left from the United States who believes that education can produce a greater public good. I think when people see some of the underlying, not so much the physics of how heat goes in and out of the atmosphere, but they don't know what carbon is. Imagine the Earth is covered with forests, and the forests, as you know, suck up carbon dioxide from the air. The trees, the solid bulk of the trees, isn't made from the water in the ground or minerals in the soil. It's made from carbon in the air. So forests imagine the jungles of the Amazon and in the Jurassic era, jungles spreading elsewhere and stuff. The trees soaked up an entire atmosphere of forest, and then those sunk down and later become coal. And then the next generation of trees sucked up the entire atmosphere of Earth, the carbon, and sunk down to make another tiny layer of coal. This went on for 85 million years. What we're doing is we're releasing, when we burn the carbon, when we burn coal, we're releasing an entire atmosphere of Jurassic atmosphere into the Earth every few hours. So we could do the number of Jurassic atmospheres per month. And we could say, wow, we've gone down from 14 duplications of Jurassic Park this month to only 12 and a half next month. That's pretty good.
That's fantastic.
Fantastic.
Brilliant, brilliant idea.
Romy, Mike, I can see you in the crowd. You're at another table.
Yeah, so I am here. Steve Colgan said something about making everyone Hindu, but I don't know whether we can discuss that one now. However, virtual signaling, Cohen Smith, sorry, I can't get over to you, but virtual signaling, how do we increase giving badges for people to choose better things like slow, efficient shipping, that kind of thing? I know we've mentioned virtual signaling today.
So how do you make, in other words, desirable behaviour more visible?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose how do you give badges for good behaviour would be interesting.
It's very interesting because it's something, again, that economics doesn't really understand. It doesn't really understand status or reputation, just as it doesn't really understand, I think, obligation. It's a really interesting question. One interesting thing you could do as a framing would be you start off with a balance every year and you use it up. In Italy, you don't gain penalty points on your license, you lose points. And the evidence seems to be that it's more effective. You start off with 12, and if you're caught speeding, you're down to 9. So starting people off at a base point and making it publicly available according to your use would work both at an individual level, but also at the level of collective guilt. I think there's a very important thing, by the way, about collective guilt and shame, which is if you've got a very, very good reason, okay, economics or law applies to everybody simultaneously, all at once. In many ways, if you deploy what you might call shame and persuasion as distinct from law and economics, there's an advantage that nobody spots, which is, let's say you wanted people to put their dishwashers on at 12 o'clock at night rather than 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay? Now, that would make quite a big difference because the UK is kind of nuclear powered at midnight, roughly. Not completely, but very largely. I've never seen any attempt to make that happen, to make that change happen. What's also important about that is if you encourage it, make it voluntary, people who have a good reason, someone whose washing machine is immediately above someone else's bedroom, can ignore it. People who find it easy can adopt it. And so there's something about the nudge approach and also the social shame and stigma approach, which I think we often miss about libertarian paternalism, which is you can be more ambitious with what you encourage if people with a good reason not to participate are free not to do so and not economically punished for doing so. So actually using shame and reputation can be very potent.
There's actually a really cool experiment with punch cards that you get when you go to your local coffee shop. And what the researchers did is when they were giving out the coffee punch cards, they would give the punch card with already a punched hole. And so what that did is it signaled to the coffee drinker that this is a great behavior, that they should be coming back more often. And so just by a simple punch of a card, that incentivized people to come back on a weekly basis way more frequently than they would otherwise do. So just by these basic tiny cues to signal that, hey, this is a behavior that you should continue doing, they completely changed their business and grew their revenues. And people kept coming back, which is the really cool thing.
To make visible the progress you've already made.
Absolutely.
I pretty much defer to that. I would put that in the context of what our previous speaker said. When you're by yourself at any given moment, totally by yourself, you want to do nothing or have people do things for you. The moment you think about a group, think of medals given in the Army, which we've had references to the wonderful events of 75 years ago. If you're part of a group, if it's not a malicious group, you have a purpose for doing this other thing, the camaraderie at a coffee shop, building up from these smaller groups. So I think if one uses those techniques, but keeps in the back of mind who's watching this, right, then one has a chance. I think human beings, you know how you have recessive genes inside you and dominant genes. You might have recessives for red hair, and your children would only have it if your spouse also has the same recessive. Same thing with the benevolence or non-benevolence of human behavior. These techniques can bring it out, but to bring it out, you need a goal, a purpose, and an aim. And the communities, of which we have many beautiful communities available for us, those can help pull it out.
Very interesting. I know we have roaming Mike in the balcony now.
Yeah, I'm in the posh seats up here. So can you tell me your name, please, sir?
Hello, my name is Pete.
And Pete, can you read out your counterintuitive thought, please?
I absolutely can. It is to ditch degrees Celsius and replace it with a new metric, so similar to the first point. Two psychological problems we see. First, with Celsius, there's positive associations. More Celsius sounds like something we want more of. There's almost no personal situation where you want there to be fewer Celsius. And a small denomination effect being the second one, that these are tiny, tiny magnitudes relative to the amount that we talk about day to day. So half a degree here, 3/4 of a degree there. So the proposition is to have new degrees that we might call degrees CC or degrees climate change. That metric could be a little bit different. We see with earthquakes, they have the Richter scale, which is the actual impact of the power of an earthquake, but they also have the Mercalli scale, which is the amount of impact that the earthquake had. I would suggest that CCs could do a similar sort of job.
Cool, you should work in Behavioural and Science.
Well, I think we've solved this because after Brexit it'll be back to Fahrenheit anyway. But Britain is also a peculiar country, by the way, I will explain to any Americans here, where we typically use centigrade for low temperatures in the tabloid press and Fahrenheit for high temperatures, because, ooh, it's over 90 sounds really exciting, whereas we can go, it's -4. And because we don't actually have a very exciting climate, we've got to use the selection of different measures to make our climate seem more exciting. The business of having very, very fine measures is great, because, of course, the problem with the Richter scale is it's logarithmic. It's like decibels. So if actually you increase decibels by 10, it's 10 times louder. And the same is true, I think, of the Richter scale, if I'm right. And so creating something which was the opposite way around, where it actually amplified the element of temperature due to climate change, rather than minimized it, is again that's a really, really big idea.
Smash him. We have an anonymous submission here. So one of the boxes you could tick on your cards was that you didn't want to read it out. So this is from someone who didn't want to read it out. The interesting one here was that we might have to actually get people to use more plastic straws, because plastic straws could make you feel like you're doing your bit and give you a completion effect. So it might make you feel like you're doing enough. So actually, by getting people to use more plastic straws, they might feel more guilty day to day and therefore enact even bigger changes in their lifestyle. Paddle.
I'm not sure how Californians would feel about that. Yeah, I'm trying to encourage the opposite behavior, right? Not sure that would be a good thing to give people basically the incentive to do the exact opposite of what you would like them to do, specifically in that context.
I mean, there is a really interesting point here, I think, which is, someone told me that plastic straws, I'm not entirely sure how they get into the sea anyway, okay? But anyway, they account for something like 0.002% of the plastic in the sea, and something like 30% of it is fishing nets that are abandoned. And one of the things which I think the questioner is asking is, there's a huge danger in creating small, visible, virtuous acts which detract from far more important behavior changes we could be making. It's rather like the fact that it's much more visible if you switch to a hybrid car than it is if you change your boiler. Even though, to be honest, changing your boiler, your central heating boiler, might be the best decision and the most important thing you can do. But as I said, unless you're the most boring man in the world, you can't really chat up girls by talking about your new boiler. And so there's very little signalling value to it, whereas there's very high signalling value to a campaign against plastic straws. And one of the other things I've often argued about is, if you can, get people to do good by stealth. Now that sounds a really weird thing, because the environmental movement is committed to having people doing the right thing for the right reasons. Now I'd argue that if your behavior's good, your reasons don't really matter that much. And you might even argue that the fact that you're not knowingly doing something for a virtuous reason is good news, because you don't then practice moral offsetting, which is where the fact that you're very, very religious about not eating meat and not using plastic straws means you then go off on an eco-holiday, which always seems to involve a long-haul flight. Have you noticed? Okay, so that kind of moral offsetting is potentially a serious problem, that we engage in what you might call lots of small symbolic acts, whereas the really big changes don't get made. And I think that's something which we have to be really alert to. In many ways, it might be preferable. I'll tell you the final story about this, about doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. I'm in one of the new electric London cabs when I'm not taking Uber Lux, occasionally. And anyway, one of the things I noticed is, I said, it's unbelievably serene and beautifully lovely when it's stationary. Because diesel cabs rattle and make a horrible noise. This thing is very well insulated, and you sit in completely static, serene silence. I said to the driver, this is really lovely, isn't it, when it's stationary? To which he replied, you don't think I bought it to save the fucking earth, did you? Now, actually, does it matter why he's doing it? I think is the question to ask. What do you think?
I think we should all ride that cab.
We've come to the end of our time now, so we're going to take a quick vote on which ideas. So I'll recap the ideas that have been shared, and we'll have a small hand clap or a large hand clap, depending. So remember your number ones, that's kind of I agree, but not fully. And then your number threes was that's my vote for that. So I'll go through all of the four together. Are we all ready? Turning carbon a different colour so we can all see it and it feels really, really bad. We don't have all the time in the world. I have to go a bit quicker on this one, sadly. Cohn's idea about virtual signalling and making sure that you can feel good about doing the behaviour. I'm going to throw in Rory's idea about only putting your dishwasher on at night time to make sure it's nuclear powered rather than electric powered. We had Pete's idea in the back about getting rid of Celsius and Fahrenheit and adding in a new measure that really makes climate change feel more powerful to us. And finally, we have the idea about getting people to use more plastic straws. Okay, well, with that in mind, I think we should say thank you to our panel. Thank you for Pete, Frizz, and everyone who joined in the big conversation this year. And I'll now hand back over to Sam to close the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.